The theme of this year's AUSA conference was Building the Army of 2030. We spoke with Doug Bush, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology, about how he's making sure the Army can get there. Doug, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So the Army's sending a lot of weapons, obviously, to Ukraine. Does the industrial base have the ability to reconstitute those weapons?
It does, and that's a combination of just, American businesses being flexible and innovative, but also the government having a capability that we keep, the organic industrial base that's there for this reason, to allow us to ramp up and fill the short-term needs, while commercial industry comes in over the top for a longer-term conflict to help. But it's not without its challenges. Going from low rates of production to max rates is absolutely doable, but just does take time. So managing this period we're in, where we're ramping up while still sending a lot on a monthly basis, is our challenge right now.
How is your office supporting that ability for industry to resupply?
So the first part starts with Congress. So Congress has been very generous with the funding, and also critically, they've given us the funding in a flexible way that we've been able to use it not just to buy weapons, but also to invest in industrial capacity. So that's a partnering with industry to expand production capabilities, where they put in money, we put in money. So that is a huge difference this time than just our routine business of just buying weapons. The second part is contracting. So we've been able to use all kinds of authorities, some we used during COVID, to go much faster than normal. So that gets money flowing into industry, which enables them to invest and actually get these production lines cranked up. So it's requires a lot of cooperation from both parts of the government, Congress and the executive.
What about working with allies? Is there something that you can do to take advantage of their industrial capacity?
Absolutely. So that's the critical. There's kind of three legs of the stool. There's ramping up our production, using our allies, and then also getting donations from allies. So three parts of getting weapons to Ukraine. With regard to the allies, yes, absolutely. The United States, of course, has a huge economy. We can do a lot, but so do our partners, especially in Europe, but not just Europe. So we are already procuring artillery ammunition, for example, from them that goes directly to Ukraine. We are working to do more of that. So working with allies to find where they've got production capacity that supplements ours has been vital. Kind of a term I've used or tried to use is the United States is the arsenal of democracy, but we really need an arsenal of democracies, because we need others to help. It doesn't have to all be us. So that's been really productive right now. I think we're seeing great returns from that.
You know, a big issue for industrial capacity is supply chain, to make sure that you've got every part that you need where you need it. What are your initiatives around that?
So it starts with being able to see the supply chain in depth. So actually, one of our most involved in this conflict program executive offices, they do ammunition, such as artillery ammunition, has for years had, I think, the best program to see the supply chain in depth, all the way down to precursor chemicals that go into ammunition manufacturing. Step one. Step two is harder, which is doing something about it. So we know where our single points of failure are, or risk areas. So what we're doing in a lot of cases is developing second sources for those materials. So you're not relying on one factory, sometimes one building in one place for the whole supply chain. There's a cost to that. So it's more efficient to have one supply source, but you have to now account for risk. We saw it during COVID, that illustrated that, and now we're seeing it here. One industrial accident or one situation in one plant, you don't want to be completely dependent on that.
How has your office supported the Army's pivot from fighting wars in Afghanistan and Iraq to near-peer conflicts?
Sure. So really, our job in the Army is to actually develop and acquire the systems. We've worked closely with, and it really started with my predecessor, Dr. Bruce Jetty, previous administration, and General Mike Murray at Army Futures Command. They working with their secretaries of the Army, Esper and McCarthy, set the 6 new modernization priorities in place. We're continuing those. Those new priorities are really oriented on great power competition, fighting potentially a country like Russia or China, versus counterinsurgency. So really following through on those programs is our contribution to that shift. I would say, however, that the Middle East is still there. We still have troops there. We are still supporting them as well. for example, with counter UAS, counter unmanned systems types of technology. So we haven't completely lost sight of that. We still have troops around the world. But really the shift to the new big platforms, for example, helicopters, tanks, longer range artillery, that's our main focus, and the communications network that goes with that.
You know, logistics is going to be very challenging in the Pacific given the large distances. Does the Army currently have the right equipment, to have that logistical support and the resupply necessary for the Pacific operations?
So we do have a lot of force structure. We have a lot of pre-positioned stocks, for example. We have floating pre-positioned stocks. We've got the logistics infrastructure in place, but I think General Daly, for example, my partner at Army Materiel Command, would tell you that it's designed for a little bit less of a contested environment. So we have to invest in more capability and assume that those supply chains will be under attack. So that's an ongoing effort. That's one of the Secretary's big priorities, is to move the dial a bit, invest in those long-range logistics capabilities, watercraft, new aircraft that we're already doing, but also critically the information systems that underlie that. So you know where your supplies are, and if you have to divert, you can divert quickly because of where the enemy is and what they're doing. So that's a major effort going forward.
And you're going to be continuing your acquisition strategy to get the Army there.
It is. It's a question of priorities. So the Army doesn't have unlimited funds, but I think we clearly recognize the Army's role in the Pacific. One of the main roles is theater logistics. The Army provides that for the Joint Force. So that's not something we're walking away from, and actually it's probably going to be an area of additional investment in the years ahead.
Doug, Army acquisitions take a long time for high-tech systems. Small businesses can go bankrupt waiting for that funding. What progress have you made to shorten those timelines, and what additional changes are you planning for the future?
Sure. So, and acquisition at speed is really my number one priority, because that's what I'm being told the system wants, the DoD wants, and Congress wants. So we're absolutely focused on that. So one thing is we are using new authorities we got from Congress a few years ago that are now finally in place that allow us to go much faster to start programs. So it just takes away some of the bureaucracy and some of the steps you traditionally had to go through to get started. So that's number one. Number two is, I think, a really good approach of doing more real prototypes earlier. So quickly get to real prototypes, let soldiers try them. You get a much better understanding of what's possible and how much work's left to be done to get to a real version than with just PowerPoint or just computer models. But having said that, digital engineering is a critical part of going faster. The more you can do at high fidelity in computer modeling, which is where industry's going with a lot of their engineering work, also facilitates that. So it's really just using the authorities from Congress, working with Congress on letting us be flexible with our approaches. That's been the number one thing to allow us to go faster.
You used those authorities for the next generation squad weapon.
We did.
Tell us about that.
So that was a rapid prototyping effort, 27 months from start to having a system selected for production that we're about to go in now. So I would contrast this with our long effort to get a new pistol, which took much longer, and that was comparatively simpler because it was just a pistol. This effort, it's a great example of where we have innovative defense industry and we have great firearms manufacturers in this country. They've already done a lot of the R&D. So we just need to take advantage of that. That's a way to shortcut the system. Instead of like 7 years, get things into production in 2 or 3.
And are you able to scale that across the board in the Army, or was that a one-off?
It gets more challenging the more complicated the systems are. But we are trying to use a rapid prototyping approach, for example, for our new vehicle that will replace the Bradley fighting vehicle, currently called the optionally manned fighting vehicle. So that's a big system. And that kind of system is where it's more challenging, but still possible. It's a 5-year window for that rapid prototyping. We want to go faster than that, but if we can actually get 5 years and then get into production, that's a huge improvement over kind of the 10-year timelines that are more common. So I can't say I'm declaring victory yet. There's a lot of work to do, but that's the idea.
How is your office supporting JADC2 development, and what are the current challenges that you're facing?
Sure. So our office, working with the Army from their requirement standpoint on networking. We acquire and develop all the actual networking gear. And unlike a lot of other programs that are kind of big programs like a helicopter or a tank, the network is composed of really dozens or almost 100 or more subsystems, and a lot of it is commercial technology. So we put that together. We work with Army Futures Command in particular because they're doing a series of exercises to explore the Army's role in JADC2 and how we can do it. So really, staying flexible is the most important thing, because the private sector technology there is moving so quickly that we've got to avoid getting committed to one path and one technology that in a few years won't be the latest thing.
And you alluded to this a little bit, which was the digital transformation strategy, right? You talked about digital engineering. There's also DevSecOps. What's your strategy around that?
Yeah, so I mentioned speed of acquisition. My number 2 thing is software reform. So we've got to move the Army from a 20th century software model to a 21st century. And I brought in additional software talent. My principal deputy, for example, his name's Young Bang, came from the private sector software industry. And he's leading the effort on my behalf to fundamentally reset how we do software acquisition. So that includes using the new software pathway. That's one of the new authorities granted by Congress. The Army traditionally would do software the way we would buy, artillery shells. We would develop it, field it, which is not a term industry uses, and then we would sustain it as a separate activity, also not a term industry uses. It's really all 3 things at the same time. You have to develop it, put it in the hands of people, and then keep improving it basically forever, so you can keep it up to date with cyber and other things. So shifting the Army that model, it's not going to be easy, but I think people are seeing the fruits of it now. We've got 8 programs using that new pathway.
Part of your title is technology, so I want to ask you about the new technologies that you're going to be investing in short-term and long-term.
Yeah, so this is where Army Futures Command, they execute our S&T plan that I oversee, has done great work and is doing great work. So one example is biotechnology. So the Army is made up of soldiers. So fundamentally, the Army is people. So technologies that support soldier health and performance is a huge thing. Quantum computing, while there's a lot of private sector research in that, we have to be in there as well. Artificial intelligence, another area where we are aware of a ton of great work in the private sector that we have to be looped into as well. And finally, the Army does have technologies the private sector doesn't really want to develop. So really exotic new armor materials for tanks or armored fighting vehicles that are dramatically lower weight, for example. That's research we're doing that will enable future systems.
And finally, are there any technologies that you're testing at Project Convergence this year?
Yeah, so there's quite a few underway. A lot of them are network technologies, so focused around solving JADC2 operational problems. How do you connect in a contested electronic environment? How do you connect sensors to shooters so fast that you're inside the enemy's ability to respond? That's the main goal. But there's also a lot of robotics and unmanned vehicles being demonstrated out there. So those are 2 areas, the ground and air robots, that I'm really optimistic about. Industry, if you walk the floor here at AUSA, there's a ton of investment there. We need to take advantage of it. And there's a lot more we could do in both of those areas. And those are a major part of PC22 as well.
All right, well, when that happens, you'll have to come back and tell us what happens and what the results were.
That'd be great.
Doug, thanks so much for being on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.